So our next speaker is going to be Jessica Martinez has come all the way from the East Coast. She works for the Helping Individual People Survive, which is HIPS, and she is one of the recent speakers at the historic hearing that took place in Washington, D.C. In front of their Judiciary Committee, where they had 14 hours of testimony about passing the Health and Safety Act that would decriminalize prostitution and also make it so that you could work indoors without being thrown out, which is something different than what we have, like, say, for example, in Oakland, where you can be thrown out for working as a prostitute. So, Jessica, come tell us all about the fabulous work in Washington, D.C.
Hello. So first things first, I want to throw out a few labels. I know that people dislike labels many times, but my name is Jessica Kiaraliza Martinez. I am Latina, I am trans, and I am educated. And I mention those things because they all inform me in the decisions that I make and in the work I do. When my organization decided to introduce the Community Health and Safety Act to the Judiciary and Health Committee in our city, the purpose was to try to bring out people from the most marginalized areas: Black women, trans women, Black trans women, Latina women, white women, women who work. And let me be clear, sex work is work. I'm sure people in this room know that, but many people don't. And one thing that I think is the most important thing that anyone can do is talk about how sex work is labor and how every woman's labor deserves to be valued. One of the biggest things that my opponents brought forth to us was talking about human trafficking. And what I thought was astounding about the hearing was I saw so many white women talk about human trafficking and their thoughts on human trafficking. And the word that they kept throwing around was trans woman of color. I get it. I know what it's like to experience violence. I've had guns pulled out on me from dates. I've had people physically assault me while I'm doing sex work, and even sexually. And I was not able to call the police. MPD wasn't going to come and try to assist me. If I called them, I would go to jail. And if I went to jail, who knows what my university would have done. I attended the George Washington University, and it's one of actually the most expensive school in the country. And I had a lot of financial aid, but it wasn't enough. So what's a woman to do when she's left with no choices? So going back to that wonderful term, survival sex work. I did sex work to survive. Whether it was porn, whether it was escorting, I was simply trying to make sure that I had the means to pay for rent, pay for food, and pay for my education, because my parents did it. And I have the Community Health and Safety Act in front of me, and one thing that I want to highlight is that the definition of prostitution for this is, this person is arranging for prostitution involving himself or herself, or the individuals involved have attained the age of 18 years, and have an agreement that is voluntary and freely given. The arrangement involves no force, fraud, coercion, or any violation of the Prohibition Against Human Trafficking Amendment Act of 2010. I cannot tell you how many people came out against this piece of legislation talking about the Nordic model, which essentially the Nordic model of sex work decriminalization has the sex worker who is selling sex work incapable of being imprisoned, but the individual purchasing sex work can be criminalized. They're still criminalized. And what I hear when someone says that is, well, I want you to be safer, and I want women to be safer, but I don't want you to have money. I want you to suffer. I want you to be incapable of paying for your bills. I want you to be incapable of of getting that education. I want you to be incapable of getting food on the table for your family, because I still think there's something wrong about this. Let me be clear. The only way to help sex workers, and sex workers in DC said this, there were 72 organizations that came out. I want to note that 2 of those organizations were BYP 100, Black Youth Project, as well as Black Lives Matter. And the reason they came out is because we know the violence that Black people face. We know the violence that Black trans women face. And many Black trans women have to do sex work to survive, like many other trans women in this country. And when you criminalize any part of sex work, you are taking away the means of a woman to make decisions with her body so she can survive and provide for not only just people, but the community. There's actually a collective of trans women that's mostly comprised of Black and brown trans women known as No Justice, No Pride. And they have a housing collective that provides housing for as many trans people as they can, and they're young women. And when I hear these young women speak, it honestly pains me so much to hear them talk about their experiences, because something that I know is shared among sex workers, and something that I'll admit, is when it comes to the police, you have to do whatever they say. I mean, you could choose not to, but that could be staring at the barrel of a gun or being in prison. And when an officer tells me that he knows what I'm doing and that he'll make it go all the way if I just lay with him, and it's not what I want to do, you do it. And that's, horrifying. And it pains me to hear from a woman who just turned 18, a young Black trans woman, that she's working the strip, she's walking up, and there's an officer behind her saying, "Yeah, baby, keep it walking, keep it working, we see you." That is violence. That is violent. And I don't want women, trans, Black, cisgender, I don't want any of these individuals to experience that sort of violence, because unfortunately in DC, we have one of the most militarized police forces in the country. In my neighborhood of Trinidad, which is 77% Black, there's a sign on Neal Street that is about a police checkpoint in '08. And they instituted this police checkpoint where essentially any vehicle entering my neighborhood could be stopped and searched at any time. It's not a coincidence that that neighborhood is majority Black. And it's not a coincidence that West Virginia and Mount Olivet, the 2 streets that border my neighborhood, are known for being strips. And the issue with that is that we literally can see that in that time period, they were trying to end violence and help the community heal. You're not helping anyone by criminalizing them. You're not helping anyone by striking fear in the hearts of women. And the whole point of the legislation was to let people know that sex work is going to happen, and it definitely happens in DC. And those senators and Congress representatives, they want us. They want people that do sex work. And they want to have that experience. And let me tell you, being a trans woman, there are so many people that want the experience. They want you to give it up for free. And they feel like they deserve your body. Well, I know that if I'm going to be a horse and pony show, I need to get paid for it. And that's my right. Because if someone is going to use my body for their own personal gain, I need to make sure that I'm getting my cut too. And the longer that we continue to criminalize sex work is the longer that we are economically subjugating women to this oppressive patriarchal force that basically states that men own women and that a woman is to belong to a man. And honestly, if that's a woman's choice to be a mother and be at home and be a housewife, that's fine. But there are women that do that and are sex workers too. And that's a reality that we need to face. And when these women came to the hearing to testify about human trafficking, they were talking about how we're going to allow people to traffic children. That's another point I want to bring up. I read the bill to you. 18 years old. I said it twice for a reason. It's because we understand that young women are engaging in sex work, especially trans women in the district. I know 16 to 17-year-old girls who do that. But with this legislation, they're still safe. Actually, if anyone tries to traffic them, that's who the police are going to go after. So when these people come out and they say that we want to decriminalize half of the bill, we want to decriminalize the sale of sex, but want to criminalize the purchasing of sex, you are still criminalizing sex work. You are still putting sex workers in a dangerous position where they know that their dates are aware that what they're doing is illegal, but what you're doing is not. What kind of position is that to put a woman in? You know, what we want is to actually heal the community. And what we tried to do in DC, which, by the way, Chairman Allen, this is for you. Thank you for not allowing our city to have a vote on a piece of legislation because you thought it was too controversial. If you think it's too controversial to provide people basic human decency and rights, you shouldn't be sitting on that council. You shouldn't be sitting on that council for the health and judiciary. And honestly, I know your constituents. I know lots of people in DC. And the fabulous thing about these sorts of hearings, and something that Rachel was commenting on earlier, is you get to see who's who and who's for what. And if you are going to co-sponsor a piece of legislation and then say it's too controversial to put it forth, don't take that seat at the table. And speaking of that, something else I want to bring up about these antagonists, these people that are targeting the sex work community and trying to remain the practice of sex work as a criminality. They came out and they were like, why weren't we invited to the table? And my coworker Tamika not only pointed out that they were, but beyond that, we built the damn table. The reason people are here to testify on this piece of legislation is because people who work at HIPS, people who are sex workers, people who live in DC and care about the people in our communities, the women in our communities, the men in our communities who feel unsafe, who now after Sister Fosta, being someone who used to escort on the internet and then had to move to a more street sex-based format, like these women, these young women, are now putting themselves out there in positions where they can find violence either in the means of physical or sexual and have no way of protecting themselves. The way that I see the community banding together is when I do outreach on the van, I see cis women, trans women, black or white, Latina, Asian, on these strips, walking together, being alongside each other. There are men in our communities who have no involvement in sex work, and they come out and they support these women. They make sure they're safe. Because the black men in these neighborhoods don't want to see black women murdered anymore. The men that come out and help these women don't want to see trans women murdered anymore. And if I can speak more personally to a client that I interacted with or someone I met on outreach, there was a man who on West Virginia, the street that I was talking about before that I just live off of, he was telling me how his fiancée was shot and killed. She's a trans woman. But her family didn't think so. I can get what that's like. So what happened? They had a funeral for her, and he wasn't allowed to come because they thought he was a gay man, and their son was a gay man. But that's not their son, it's their daughter. And he couldn't even attend his own fiancé's funeral. That's the sort of violence I want to combat. That is the sort of work we are trying to do here by talking about sex work. Because honestly, the more that we continually criminalize sex work, the more bodies are going to be stacked up. And as a trans woman, I know it's going to be a lot of trans women, especially the black ones, because those are the people who are the most marginalized. Those are the people who get taken advantage of the most. Those are the people who experience violence. When I can hear about black trans women being murdered in PG County, which is just outside of DC, in West Hyattsville, being stabbed 132 times, or hear about a trans woman being shot on the street in Capitol Heights, Maryland, which is just outside of DC, close to the areas that we work with these communities, it pains me. But it also reminds me that I could be next. So if I don't come out and talk about this, if I don't come out and support these women, It could be me, it could be you, it could be anyone. So let's give women the right, the legal right, to call on the so-called police force that protects us. Because the only people that they're serving and protecting are people who have money and who have property. And that's enough is enough. We need to change that. If the police came to us and they asked us, how can we help the community heal? Our response, don't arrest us. And that's pretty much it. You know, it's just don't arrest us, don't criminalize us, don't strike fear in our hearts. Don't walk behind the gals that you think are hot and talk about how sexy you think they are. Or don't rape a black trans woman and then throw her in jail, and as you're putting her in jail, say, why would a man want a piece of ass when he can get some pussy? That sort of behavior is unforgivable, honestly, because it just reminds me the damage and the lack of care and compassion that the police force has. And living in the city that has one of the most militarized police force where they can institute checkpoints in black neighborhoods because they feel like it, which, by the way, the neighborhood and the city came together, and within a year it was ruled unconstitutional. However, MPD left the sign up. I looked at it the other day, so it's still on Neal Street Northeast, if anyone's curious. But, you know, the point is that at the end of the day, what we were trying to do in DC was simply get a hearing to talk about an important subject that we've tried to talk about before. And honestly, I'm proud of my organization and the organizations that came together to bring that, because having a hearing, that's, like I said, building the table. But again, they decided that because the issue was so controversial, involving organizations flying out from all over the country, Louisiana, Nevada, New York, just all these collectives coming out against the legislation, but not listening to the 72 organizations that are DC based on why this is important, that's a problem. When the federal government brings their attack dogs, the people that work in the human trafficking realm of the federal police force, and they come and they say that this sort of legislation will increase human trafficking, when in the bill that I just read to you, it changes nothing to the Human Trafficking Act that we have in our city, and actually emboldens women to have the power to have a legal voice. That's a problem. So what I encourage people, especially young people, is you can vote. You can go out and actually vote for your constituency. So pay attention. Because if we don't pay attention now, we might not be here to argue it the next day. So while I have my time on this earth, and while there are people who might want to cut it short, while I'm here, I'm going to say, sex work is work. We need to decriminalize sex work, and we need to protect these women that are marginalized. Because if we don't, what do we have? Who do we have? There will be no mothers, there will be no children, there will be no families. We're just going to keep destroying them, all because a man wants to be able to control a woman, or because we don't believe that women have the right to work and make the choices with their bodies that they deserve to make.